This video is going to talk about the often confusing topic of negative exponents and look at the answer to why they switch places when they're in the numerator and or denominator. So the first thing we want to look at is the rules of exponents that address this. So the relevant ones that we're looking at, first of all, we've got x to the m divided by x to the n equals x to the m minus n. So there's our basic quotient rule that when we're dividing the same base, we subtract the exponents. And then we've also got x to the negative m equals 1 over x to the m, and 1 over x to the negative m equals x to the m. So those are the relevant exponential rules that we're looking at. So first of all, let's just start with a basic x to the fifth over x cubed. So our quotient rule says that we subtract those. So we would have x to the 5 minus 3 power, which becomes x squared. So we can all agree on that. Most people understand that rule. And when we write it out, we could also look at it as x times x times x times x times x divided by x times x times x. We can cross those out, and we have 2 left over on the top. We've got 1 on the bottom, 1 as in the number 1, and that becomes x squared. So those two things are the same thing. So x to the 5th power divided by x to the 3rd power gives us x squared, and then x times x times x times x times x divided by x times x times x also gives us x squared. So now let's look at an example where the numerator is smaller than the denominator. We're going to apply this same rule. We've got x squared divided by x to the 6th. So then we will have x squared, or x to the 2nd, minus 6, which is going to give us x to the negative 4 power. So we get a negative exponent here. So now let's write it out like we did with our first example. We've got x times x, and then we've got 6 on the bottom. So x times x times x times x times x times x. Those two we're going to cross out. We're left with 1 on top and 4 x's on the bottom. If we apply our product rule, we would add the exponents of those. So there's 4 of them, which means we've got x to the 4th with 1 on top. So now, if we look here, we got x to the negative 4 using our quotient rule. But when we wrote it out in terms of repeated multiplication and we just divided common factors, we have x to the 4th on the bottom. So if we look at these two things, we started with the same problem. X to the negative 4 is the same thing as x 1 over x to the 4th. Now let's look at it a different way. Let's say we've got x cubed, and we're going to just count down to x squared, x to the 1st, x to the 0, x to the negative 1, x to the negative 2. So we're just going down a degree each time. So if you think about this, what you're doing here is dividing each term by x to go down a degree. So we've got x squared equals x cubed divided by x. So then that would just be x squared. X to the 3rd divided by x to the 1st gives us x squared. So then we would look at x to the 1st would then be x squared divided by x. And if we keep going, x to the 0 would be x to the 1st divided by x. And so that's where we get our other rule that we talked about. There's a video for this one, that x to the 0 or anything to the 0 power is 1. So now if we keep going with that, we've got x to the negative 1 would be x to the 0 over x. So then here's where we can look at that now. X to the 0 equals 1. So let's bring that over here, and we'll expand this out. So x to the negative 1 would be 1, since x to the 0 is 1 divided by x. So that is where that negative exponent moves down. We could keep that going. It would be x to the negative 2 would be x to the negative 1 over x. X to the negative 1, we just said, equals 1 over x. So we can then apply our rule to where that's going to move down, and x to the negative 2 would be 1 over x times x, or 1 over x squared. Let's look at this one other way. So that tells us why a negative exponent in the numerator goes down to the denominator. Let's look at a negative exponent in the denominator. So we've looked at this many times. X to the 0 equals 1. So let's say we've got x to the negative, or 1 over x to the negative 5th power. So now we've got a negative exponent in the denominator, and we want to see how that moves up to the numerator and becomes positive. So we can replace 1 with x to the 0. So x to the 0 power then over x to the negative 5th is the same thing as 1 over x to the negative 5th. Now we're going to apply our quotient rule. We're going to subtract them. So that would be x to the 0 minus negative 5. We're subtracting the denominator. When we subtract a negative, that becomes plus, so that becomes x to the positive 5 power. We started with 1 over x to the negative 5th. By applying our quotient rule, we get to x to the 5th. So then we can look at that to explain our negative exponent rule, that if x is in the denominator, if negative exponent is in the denominator, we can move that up to the numerator. I hope all of those examples help. I know negative exponents can be tricky and confusing for a lot of people. So hopefully this gives you a better understanding of why those rules work and where the negative exponents come from and how they turn into positive exponents by switching location. If this did help, I just ask that you would subscribe and watch for more videos.